What happens when one of Britain's most respected actors walks into what should have been a routine morning television interview, only to find himself face to face with a host who seems determined to tear him down? In just 32 seconds, a simple question about his latest film would spiral into one of the most shocking live television meltdowns ever captured on camera, exposing the dark underbelly of daytime TV and leaving viewers absolutely stunned. Anthony Hopkins sat in the bright studio chair, adjusting his tie with the calm confidence of a man who had conquered Hollywood. The legendary actor, known for bringing complex characters to life on the silver screen, had no idea he was about to encounter his most challenging performance yet. Across from him, Lorraine Kelly beamed that familiar television smile, but something felt different this morning. There was an edge to her usual warmth, a sharpness hiding behind those practiced eyes. "So Anthony," Lorraine began, her voice carrying that sing-song Scottish accent that millions of viewers had grown to love over the years. "Tell us about this new film of yours. I have to say, watching the trailer, I found myself wondering if you're perhaps getting a bit too old for these action roles." The question hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Anthony's eyebrows lifted slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his distinguished features. He had faced down interviewers for decades, handled everything from probing personal questions to harsh film criticism, but there was something uniquely venomous in the way Lorraine had delivered that opening salvo. "Well, Lorraine," Anthony replied, his voice measured and controlled, "I think age brings experience, and experience brings depth to any character. I don't see myself as too old. I see myself as seasoned." Lorraine's smile widened, but it wasn't warm anymore. It was the smile of a predator who had caught the scent of blood. "Seasoned, yes, but surely you must realize that audiences today want fresh faces, younger energy. Don't you think it's a bit desperate, clinging to these roles when perhaps it's time to step aside for the next generation?" The camera caught Anthony's jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. This wasn't going according to the script that his publicist had been promised. This was supposed to be a friendly chat about his upcoming thriller, a chance to connect with British audiences before the film's release. Instead, it felt like an ambush. "I wouldn't call it clinging," Anthony said, his voice still calm but with a steel undertone that anyone familiar with his work would recognize. "I'd call it passion for the craft. Something I suspect you might not fully understand given your background." The insult was subtle, but unmistakable. Lorraine's eyes flashed, and for a moment, the mask slipped completely. The television personality vanished, replaced by something harder, more vindictive. "My background?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "At least, I didn't have to play a cannibal to get people's attention. Some of us built our careers on talent, not shock value." The reference to Hannibal Lecter was a low blow, and everyone in the studio knew it. That role had brought Anthony international acclaim and demonstrated his incredible range as an actor. To reduce it to mere shock value was not just insulting, it was professionally ignorant. "Shock value," Anthony repeated slowly, his famous voice dropping to that dangerous whisper that had made audiences around the world hold their breath. "Is that what you think acting is about? Creating memorable characters, exploring the human condition? That's all just shock value to you?" Lorraine leaned forward in her chair, sensing she had struck a nerve. "Oh, come now, Anthony. Don't be so sensitive. We all know that role was just you hamming it up, playing to the cheap seats. Real actors don't need to resort to such theatrics." The accusation was devastating in its casual cruelty. To suggest that one of cinema's most nuanced performances was nothing more than cheap theatrics showed either profound ignorance or deliberate malice. Anthony's hands, which had been resting calmly on his knees, slowly curled into fists. "Theatrics," he said, his voice barely above a whisper now. "You want to talk about theatrics? What would you call this little performance of yours? This isn't journalism, Lorraine. This isn't even entertainment. This is just cruelty dressed up in television lights." The studio fell silent except for the hum of cameras and the distant murmur of the crew. Even the usually chatty production assistants had stopped their whispered conversations to watch this car crash unfold in real time. Lorraine's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place like a rubber band. "Cruelty? I'm just asking the questions that viewers at home are thinking. Isn't it time you admitted that your best days are behind you? That maybe, just maybe, you're holding on to something that's already slipped away?" The words were designed to cut deep, to find the insecurities that every aging performer carried. But Anthony Hopkins was not just any performer. He had faced down his own demons, conquered addiction, rebuilt his life and career from the ground up. He had stared into the abyss and emerged stronger. "My best days," he said, rising slowly from his chair. are the days I choose to define as my best, not the days that some failed television presenter decides to judge from her little morning show throne." The insult was precise and brutal. Lorraine's face went white, then red, as if someone had slapped her on live television. The failed television presenter comment had hit its mark perfectly, referencing her early career struggles and the years it had taken her to find her footing in the industry. "Failed?" she sputtered, her composure cracking like ice on a frozen pond. "Failed? I've been on television longer than most people have been alive. I've interviewed prime ministers, celebrities, royalty. Who are you to call me failed?" Anthony stood now, his full height making him tower over the seated host. "You've interviewed them, yes. But have you ever actually listened to what they were saying? Or were you too busy planning your next cruel little dig?" The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of this unprecedented breakdown. In living rooms across Britain, viewers were grabbing their phones, recording their televisions, knowing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Lorraine shot to her feet, her chair spinning behind her. "How dare you? How dare you come on my show, in my studio, and speak to me like that? You think because you won some awards decades ago that you can treat people however you want?" "Awards I won by respecting the craft," Anthony replied, his voice growing stronger, more commanding. "By treating my colleagues with professionalism, by understanding that being on television is a privilege, not a right to tear people down." The words hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down in an ancient duel. Lorraine's face was now a mask of pure fury, all pretense of television professionalism abandoned. Her hands were shaking, whether from anger or adrenaline, no one could tell. The studio lights seemed to burn brighter, casting harsh shadows across both their faces as they stood locked in this battle of wills. "Privilege?" Lorraine's voice cracked like a whip. "You want to talk about privilege? You think you can waltz in here with your Hollywood attitude and lecture me about television? I built this show from nothing. I earned my place here while you were off playing dress-up in movies." The accusation was petty and desperate, the kind of attack that revealed more about the attacker than the target. Playing dress-up, as if decades of masterful performances, of bringing complex characters to life, of moving audiences to tears and terror, could be reduced to something so childish. Anthony's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, everyone in that studio could see exactly why he had been so convincing as Hannibal Lecter. There was something predatory in his stillness, something dangerous in his calm. "Playing dress-up," he repeated, his voice soft but carrying the weight of barely contained fury. "Is that what you think I do? What we all do? You sit here in your little bubble, reading words off a teleprompter that other people wrote for you, asking questions that other people researched for you, and you have the audacity to mock the craft of acting?" Lorraine stepped closer, invading his personal space in a move that would have intimidated most guests. But Anthony Hopkins was not most guests. He had played kings and monsters, heroes and villains. He had commanded stages and conquered screens. A morning television host trying to bully him was almost laughably insignificant. "At least I'm real," she shouted, her voice echoing off the studio walls. "At least I don't hide behind characters and scripts. I face the world as myself, not cowering behind some made-up personality." The accusation struck at the heart of every actor's insecurity, the suggestion that they were somehow less authentic, less genuine than other people. It was a cruel and ignorant attack, the kind that revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what acting actually was. Anthony's response was quiet, controlled, and devastating. "You think hiding behind a television persona, behind a script written by others, behind the safety of your little morning show format, makes you more real than someone who has spent their life exploring the depths of human emotion? You've never been more wrong about anything in your life." The camera operators were frantically adjusting their shots, trying to capture every nuance of this extraordinary confrontation. This wasn't just good television anymore. This was television history in the making, the kind of moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. "Human emotion?" Lorraine laughed, but the sound was harsh and bitter. "You mean the kind of emotion where you pretend to eat people? Where you play monsters and psychopaths? That's your idea of exploring humanity?" She had gone back to the Hannibal well, clearly thinking it was her strongest weapon. But she had miscalculated badly. Anthony's portrayal of Dr. Lecter wasn't something he was ashamed of. It was one of his greatest professional achievements, a performance that had redefined what was possible in cinema. "Those characters," Anthony said, his voice growing quieter and more intense, "those monsters and psychopaths, as you call them, they represent the shadow side of human nature, the parts of ourselves we're afraid to acknowledge. Playing them requires more courage, more honesty, more genuine emotion than anything you've ever done in your safe little studio." Lorraine's face contorted with rage. She had started this interview thinking she could easily dominate an aging actor, reduce him to a stammering, defensive mess for the entertainment of her audience. Instead, she was being systematically dismantled by a master of his craft who refused to be bullied. "Safe little studio?" she screamed. "This is live television. Anything could happen. There's no director to call cut, no second take if I mess up. This is real pressure, real stakes." Anthony actually smiled then, and it was not a pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who had just heard something so absurd that they couldn't help but be amused. "Real pressure," he said, savoring the words. "You want to talk about real pressure? Try performing King Lear in front of 2,000 people, knowing that every word, every gesture, every breath you take will be judged by critics and audiences who understand the material better than you do. Try carrying a $100 million film on your shoulders, knowing that hundreds of people's jobs depend on your performance. That's pressure, Lorraine. This is just you throwing a tantrum on live television." The comparison was brutal in its accuracy. Whatever pressures Lorraine faced in her comfortable morning show format paled in comparison to the challenges that Anthony had conquered throughout his career. The studio audience, which had been silent up to this point, began to murmur among themselves. They had come expecting a pleasant morning chat with a beloved actor. Instead, they were witnessing a complete professional meltdown from their host. Some were pulling out phones, others were simply staring in shock at the unprecedented scene unfolding before them. Lorraine's breathing was becoming ragged, her carefully applied makeup starting to show stress lines around her eyes. She had painted herself into a corner with her attacks, and now she was lashing out like a cornered animal. "You think you're so superior," she spat, her voice cracking with emotion. "You think because you're Anthony Hopkins, because you have an Oscar, because Hollywood loves you, that you can come here and humiliate me in front of my audience. Well, I have news for you. This is my show, my studio, my rules." The possessive pronouns came fast and furious, revealing the desperate territorial instinct that was driving her behavior. This wasn't about journalism or entertainment anymore. This was about power and control, and she was losing both rapidly. Anthony remained perfectly still, letting her words wash over him like rain off a mountain. When she finally stopped shouting, the silence that followed was deafening. Then, in that famous voice that had commanded attention in theaters and cinemas around the world, he spoke. "Your show," he said quietly. "Your studio. Your rules. And yet, with all that power, all that control, the best you can do is try to tear down someone who came here in good faith to talk about their work. What does that say about you, Lorraine? What does that say about who you really are when the cameras are rolling?" The question hung in the air like an executioner's blade. It wasn't just an attack on her professionalism, it was a challenge to her very character, her moral center. And judging by the way her face crumpled, it had hit its mark perfectly. "How dare you question who I am?" she screamed, her voice reaching a pitch that made several crew members wince. "I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've helped people. I've brought joy to millions of homes. I've made a difference." But even as she said the words, they rang hollow in the hostile atmosphere she had created. The joy and warmth that had supposedly defined her career were nowhere to be seen, replaced by this ugly, vindictive creature that seemed to feed on conflict and cruelty. Anthony shook his head slowly, and for the first time, there was something almost like pity in his expression. "You want to know the difference between us, Lorraine? When I play a villain, when I portray someone dark and twisted, I'm exploring the character, trying to understand what makes them tick. You don't need to explore cruelty. You just are cruel. This isn't a performance for you. This is who you are." The words landed like physical blows. Lorraine staggered backward as if she had been struck, her face going pale beneath the studio lights. The accusation that her cruelty was genuine, not an act, cut deeper than any insult about her professional abilities. "I am not cruel," she shrieked, but the very shrillness of her voice undermined her denial. "I am not the villain here. You are. You came on my show with your arrogance, your condescension, your Hollywood superiority complex. You made me do this." The blame shifting was immediate and pathetic. She had initiated every attack, escalated every exchange, and now she was trying to paint herself as the victim of his supposed arrogance. It was a textbook example of someone who had completely lost control trying to rewrite history in real time. Anthony's response was measured and final. "I made you do this? I made you attack my age, my craft, my career? I made you try to humiliate me in front of your audience? No, Lorraine. That was all you. That was your choice, your character, your decision to be small and petty and cruel." He straightened his jacket, preparing to leave, but Lorraine wasn't finished. In a last desperate attempt to regain control, she played what she thought was her trump card. Fine, leave then. Run away like the coward you are. Prove to everyone watching that the great Anthony Hopkins can't handle a simple interview, can't handle being challenged by a real journalist asking real questions. The accusation of cowardice was designed to make him stay, to goad him into continuing this ugly confrontation. But Anthony Hopkins had not survived decades in one of the world's most challenging professions by taking bait from small-minded bullies. Real questions, he repeated, his voice filled with quiet contempt. Is that what you call character assassination and professional jealousy? Real journalism? He paused, looking directly into the camera that was focused on him. I came here to talk about my work, to connect with people who might enjoy the film I've made. Instead, I found someone so bitter, so threatened by actual talent, that she couldn't help but try to tear me down. That says everything about her and nothing about me. With that, he turned and walked toward the studio exit, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Lorraine stood frozen, watching her interview, her show, her reputation crumbling in real time. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of her complete professional collapse, the moment when Britain's sweetheart revealed herself to be something far uglier underneath the morning television smile.